The conference room at Sterling and Associates smelled exactly like money. Not fresh, crisp bills, but the scent of old leather, polished mahogany, and billable hours that cost more than most people's mortgages. I sat on one side of the massive table, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Across from me sat Elena. Elena was 28 years old, 2 years younger than me. She was wearing a black designer dress that probably cost $5,000, complete with a sheer veil that she kept adjusting, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She was playing the role of the grieving widow to perfection, but I knew better. I watched her eyes dart around the room, assessing the value of the paintings on the walls, calculating. Waiting dot at the head of the table sat Mr. Sterling, my father's attorney for the last 20 years. He looked pale. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He shuffled the papers in front of him, cleared his throat, and adjusted his glasses. If everyone is ready, Sterling said, his voice tight, we shall proceed with the reading of the last will and testament of Robert J. Thorne. Elena sat up straighter, leaning forward slightly. The grieving posture vanished, replaced by the hunger of a predator about to be fed. I'm ready, Mr. Sterling, she said softly. It's what Robert would have wanted. To have this settled quickly, Sterling nodded and began to read. The first few pages were standard legal jargon revoking prior wills, appointing executors, paying off administrative debts. I tuned it out. I wasn't here for the preamble. I was here for the punchline. Finally, Sterling stopped. He took a sip of water. He looked at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes, before looking back down at the document regarding the distribution of assets. Sterling read, Article 4, to my son, Alexander Thorne, I leave nothing. The room went dead silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Sterling continued, his voice monotone. I feel I have provided enough for Alexander during my lifetime, including his education and early employment. Therefore, he is excluded from this distribution. The entirety of my estate, including the liquid assets from the sale of Thorne Logistics, the primary residence in Connecticut, and the vacation portfolio, valued at approximately $8.2 million, is bequeathed to my wife, Elena Thorne. Elena let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. She covered her mouth with her handkerchief, feigning a sob, but I saw the smile she couldn't hide. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with malice. I told you, she whispered, low enough that only I could hear. I told you he chose me. You're nothing to him. Alex, just a mistake from his past. She expected me to yell. She expected me to flip the table, to threaten to sue, to beg the lawyer to check the date on the will. That's what the old Alex might have done. The Alex who was just a son hurting from his father's rejection. But I wasn't just a son anymore. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days tracking hidden assets, exposing fraud, and finding the things people desperately tried to bury. And for the last 6 months, while Elena was busy picking out curtains for the mansion she thought she'd inherit, I had been digging. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply reached into my messenger bag. The sound of the heavy zipper opening was loud in the quiet room. Elena frowned. Watching me, Mr. Sterling looked up. Confused, I pulled out a thick, black binder. It was 3 inches thick, stuffed with documents, photos, and bank statements. I placed it on the mahogany table with a heavy, dull thud. Elena looked at the binder, then at me. What is that? Your diary. Are you going to read us a poem about how sad you are? I ignored her. I looked directly at Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice calm and steady. Before you finalize the transfer of assets to the sole beneficiary, I have a legal question regarding the estate's liabilities. Sterling blinked. Liabilities? Alex, your father's debts are cleared. The estate is solvent. I'm sure the known debts are cleared. I agree. I tapped the cover of the black binder. My question is about the other liabilities, specifically child support and retroactive maintenance. Elena laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. Child support. Alex, you're 30 years old. You don't get child support. I'm not talking about me. I said, I opened the binder. The first page wasn't a financial sheet. It was a photograph. A picture of my father, Robert, taken just 3 months ago at a park in Ohio. He wasn't wearing his usual business suit. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And he wasn't alone. He was standing with his arms around two teenagers, a boy and a girl who looked exactly like him. Standing next to them was a woman who was definitely not Elena. I slid the photo across the table toward the lawyer, Mr. Sterling. I asked, "Does the estate cover the legal obligations for all of his surviving children, or just the ones Elena knows about?" The color drained from Elena's face so fast she looked like a ghost. She stared at the photo, her mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine fear for the first time. "That," I said, pointing to the teenagers in the photo, "would be Liam and Chloe, my brother and sister. And unlike me, they were never mentioned in the will, which, as Mr. Sterling knows, is a massive legal problem for you." I leaned back in my chair. The reading of the will was over. The war had just begun. To understand how I knew about the secret life Robert Thorne had buried for 15 years, you have to understand who I am. My father died thinking I was a disappointment. He thought I was a boring, low-level accountant who spent his days filing tax returns for local bakeries. He often told Elena that I lacked vision and killer instinct. He was wrong. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on the premise that people lie, but numbers don't. I specialize in high-stakes divorce cases and corporate fraud. When a billionaire tries to hide a yacht in a shell company in the Caymans, I'm the guy the wife hires to find it. I don't just do math. I do autopsies on financial lives. And for the last 6 months of my father's life, while he was dying of pancreatic cancer and Elena was busy redecorating his office, I was conducting an autopsy on him. It started 2 years ago, right after Elena convinced him to fire me from the family logistics company. She told him I was dead weight. He believed her. But when they revoked my access to the building, they forgot to revoke my admin access to the archive servers. I kept a back door open, mostly out of spite, just to watch the company I helped build crumble under Elena's incompetence. But one night, late in November, I noticed a recurring transaction that didn't make sense. It was labeled Orion Consulting. Every single month, on the 15th, a wire transfer of $4,500 went out to this entity. It had been happening for 15 years, consistent, unwavering. Even when the company had bad quarters, even during the recession, Orion Consulting got paid. In the logistics world, consultants are paid by the project, not a flat salary for a decade and a half. It smelled like a payoff, or hush money. I traced the reading number. It didn't go to a corporate bank in New York or a shell account in Switzerland. It went to a local credit union in a small suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. My father hated Ohio. He always complained about the routes through the Midwest. Yet, looking at his travel logs, I realized he had taken business trips to Columbus nearly every month for the last 15 years. The pieces started clicking into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. I needed visual confirmation. I took a week off work, told my friends I was going hiking, and drove 6 hours to the address linked to the bank account. It was a modest, two-story house with a white picket fence, the kind of suburban cliché my father claimed to despise. I parked my rental car down the street and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 3:30 p.m., a school bus pulled up. 2 teenagers hopped out. A boy, maybe 15, and a girl, around 13. My breath caught in my throat. The boy had the same jawline, the same nose, the same lanky walk as my father. It was like looking at a clone of Robert Thorne from his high school yearbooks. A woman came out to the porch to greet them. She looked kind, warm. She hugged them both, a simple, affectionate gesture my father rarely showed me. This was Sarah, and these were the siblings I never knew I had. I sat in that car for 3 hours, watching a family dinner through the window, watching a life my father had built in secret while he ignored me at home. He wasn't just paying them off. He was raising them. He was living a double life, playing the loving father in Ohio while playing the cold, distant tycoon in New York. The pain hit me hard, but the anger hit me harder. He had lied to everyone, to my mother before she passed, to me, even to Elena, especially to Elena. I drove back to New York that night with a plan. I didn't confront him on his deathbed. I knew if I did, he would circle the wagons. He would change the will to protect them, or worse, hide them better. No, I needed to wait until he was gone. I needed Elena to think she had won everything, so she would sign her name on the legal documents that would trap her. My father thought he was a genius at compartmentalization, but he forgot the first rule of accounting. Eventually, everything has to balance out. Elena didn't just walk into my father's life. She invaded it like a virus attacking a weakened immune system. It started 2 years ago when she was hired as his executive assistant, a title that was laughable considering she couldn't use Excel, but she had other skills. She mastered the art of isolation. First, it was the longtime secretary, Mrs. Higgins, who had been with Dad for 30 years. Elena claimed she was leaking info and got her fired. Then it was the CFO, and finally, it was me. She planted seeds of doubt in my father's mind, whispering that I was reviewing the accounts because I was impatient for him to die, that I was greedy, that I didn't respect his vision. My father, already paranoid from the early stages of his illness, ate it up. He fired me on a Friday afternoon via email. That was bad enough, but what happened next was the true betrayal. I found out through a press release that he had sold foreign logistics. He didn't just sell a company. He sold my blood, sweat, and 10 years of my life. I had built the fleet management system from scratch. I had secured the contracts that made the company valuable. He sold it all to a private equity firm for a lump sum, liquidating everything into cash and stocks. He turned a legacy into a bank account, making it liquid, portable, and easy for Elena to grab. When he was finally hospitalized, weeks away from the end, I went to see him. I wanted closure. I wanted an explanation. The room smelled of antiseptic and dying flowers. Elena was there, of course, hovering like a vulture, but she stepped out to take a call, probably with her real estate agent. I asked him why. Why sell the company? Why cut me out? He looked at me with glazed, tired eyes, and gave me the most insulting justification a father could give a son. Elena is young. Alex, she needs security. You're a man. You have your degree, your clever little accounting job. You can make your own way. I'm leaving it all to her to ensure she's taken care of. He wasn't protecting his family. He was protecting his trophy. He saw me not as his child, but as a rival for his wife's resources. And then came the final nail in the coffin, the specific legal maneuver that Elena had orchestrated. She knew that in our state, you can't easily disinherit a child without cause, and you certainly can't hide assets if there are other claims. So she convinced him to sign a new will, one that contained a very specific, perjurious clause. I saw the draft later. It stated, I declare I have one and only one child, Alexander Thorne, and no other dependents or issue. She did this to simplify the probate, to fast-track the money into her name, and to prevent any unknowns from popping up. She thought she was being clever, locking the door and throwing away the key. She thought that by forcing him to declare I was the only one, she was cutting off any avenue for me to contest a will based on ambiguity. She had no idea that by forcing him to lie on a legal document about the number of his children, she had just handed me the weapon I would use to destroy her. She thought she was sealing her victory, but she was actually signing her own confession. Patience is the single most important tool in forensic accounting. You don't strike when you find the first discrepancy. You wait until the target has committed to the lie in writing. That was the hardest part of those final months, watching my father wither away, watching Elena preening like a peacock and saying absolutely nothing. I knew that if I confronted Robert while he was still alive, the game would be over. He would have circled the wagons. He would have hired a team of expensive lawyers to set up ironclad trusts for his secret family in Ohio, or worse, he would have bought their silence and cut me out even more effectively. No, I needed the will to remain exactly as it was. A lie. I needed Elena to feel so secure, so untouchable, that she would get careless. The trap wasn't the will itself. The trap was the probate process. In New York, when you file for probate to transfer assets, the executor in this case, Elena, must sign a document called an affidavit of heirs. It is a sworn statement under penalty of perjury listing all known children and potential beneficiaries. It is designed to prevent exactly what Robert had done, hiding heirs. I monitored the court filings daily. 2 weeks after the funeral, there it was. Elena had signed the affidavit. In bold black ink, she swore that Robert J. Thorne had only one child, Alexandra Thorne. She had lied to the court. Now, I just needed the living proof to destroy her. I flew back to Ohio the next morning. I knocked on the door of the White House with the picket fence. When Sarah opened it, she looked tired, her eyes red from crying. She thought I was a debt collector. When I told her who I was, she nearly fainted. We sat at her kitchen table, and the story she told me broke my heart. She had no idea Robert was a tycoon. He had told her he was a traveling salesman for a failing logistics company, constantly on the verge of bankruptcy. He told her he couldn't afford child support, but he scraped together what he could that monthly $4,500 by working double shifts. She loved him because she thought he was a hard-working man doing his best. When I told her he had sold his company for millions and left an $8.2 million estate to a 28-year-old Mr. Stern wife, she didn't get angry. She got quiet. She went to a lockbox and pulled out 15 years of evidence. Birth certificates listing Robert as the father. Paternity test results he had insisted on before paying a dime. Thousands of photos of him at birthdays, graduations, and holidays. She handed it all to me. He lied to us, she whispered. He told the kids he was poor so they wouldn't ask for things. He made them feel guilty for needing braces. That was the moment this stopped being about money for me. This was about vengeance. I explained the plan to Sarah. She was terrified of the legal system, but I promised her I would handle everything. All she had to do was show up. I booked flights for her, Liam, and Chloe to New York. I put them in a hotel down the street from Mr. Sterling's office. I timed it perfectly. The final meeting to transfer the liquid assets into Elena's personal accounts was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. I would let Elena sign every single paper. I would let her believe the money was hers. And then I would introduce her to the family she swore didn't exist. The atmosphere in Mr. Sterling's office was celebratory, at least for one person. Elena was practically vibrating with excitement. She had a Mong Bong pen in her hand, the expensive kind my father used to use, and she was signing her name with a flourish on the final transfer documents. "I'm thinking Tuscany," she said, not to anyone in particular, but just to fill the room with her own voice. Robert always hated Italy, said it was too inefficient. But I've found this gorgeous villa near Siena, Cash offered. Of course, I think I'll spend the summer there while the dust settles here. Mr. Sterling looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting to me, but I just sat there, staring at the black binder in front of me. "Just one more signature here, Mrs. Thorne," Sterling said, pushing the final deed of transfer toward her. "This authorizes the liquidation of the main trust into your personal holdings." Elena beamed. She pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. "Done," she said, sitting back. "Is that it? Am I officially rich?" "Not quite," I said. My voice cut through her joy like a razor. I placed my hand on the black binder. "Mr. Sterling, before you notarize that transfer, I need you to look at Exhibit A." Elena rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Alex, give it up. You lost." I flipped the binder open. "These," I said, sliding a stack of bank records across the table, "are the records of Orion Consulting for $1,500 a month, every month for 15 years, sent from my father's personal account to a credit union in Columbus, Ohio." Sterling picked them up, frowning. "Consulting fees? What does this have to do with the estate?" "They weren't consulting fees," I said. I turned the page. "These are the birth certificates for two minors, Liam Robert Thorne, born 2009, and Chloe Elizabeth Thorne, born 2011. Please look at the line listed under father. Sterling adjusted his glasses. He looked at the document. His face went pale. Robert J. Thorne, he read. Aelina laughed, a harsh, nervous sound. This is ridiculous. It's a forgery. Alex typed these up on his computer. And this, I continued, ignoring her, is a photograph taken 2 months ago at Liam's middle school graduation. I slid the glossy 8x10 photo across the mahogany. It showed my father, frail but smiling, with his arms around the 2 kids. The resemblance wasn't just close. It was undeniable. Liam had Robert's nose. Chloe had his eyes. Aelina stood up, slamming her hands on the table. I don't care about some Photoshop trick. Robert told me he had no other family. He signed the will saying you were the only mistake he ever made. He lied. I said simply, and because he lied, you lied. I stood up and walked to the conference room door. But paper evidence can be argued. Biological evidence is harder to dismiss. I opened the door. Sarah, you can come in now. Sarah walked in, looking terrified but dignified, holding the hands of Liam and Chloe. The room went dead silent. It was like looking at ghosts. The boy was the spitting image of my father at 15. Even Aelina couldn't deny it. She slumped back into her chair, her face draining of color. Mr. Sterling looked from the kids to the birth certificates to the affidavit Aelina had just signed. He slowly capped his pen and pushed the transfer documents away from Aelina. Mrs. Thorne, Sterling said, his voice ice cold. You signed a sworn affidavit of heirship stating that Robert had only one surviving child. That is perjury. And since Robert failed to disclose these children in his will to specifically disinherit them, under state law, they are entitled to their statutory share of the estate. He looked at me, then at the frozen, horrified expression on Elena's face. The will is contested. The transfer is cancelled. The estate is now frozen pending a paternity investigation. Aelina looked at the villa brochure on the table, then at the 3 children standing in the doorway who had just erased her future. But, she whispered, he promised. He lied to everyone. Aelina, I said, including you. The freeze on the estate lasted 14 months, a period of time that felt like a lifetime for Aelina and a blink of an eye for me. While she was screaming at her lawyers and watching her credit cards get declined, I was doing what I do best, forensic accounting. Once the court appointed an independent administrator to oversee the mess, I was granted access to the full unredacted financials of my father's life. That was when the second bomb dropped. Aelina thought she was fighting for a piece of an $8.2 million pie. She was wrong. My father, in his desperate attempt to keep Aelina happy and maintain his image as a tycoon, had leveraged everything. The millions in the portfolio were tied up in high-interest loans and margin accounts. He had borrowed against the logistics company sale to and Aelina's shopping sprees and the renovations on the Connecticut house. The actual liquid value of the estate, after debts were cleared, was closer to $3 million. Still a lot of money, but not enough to buy a villa in Tuscany and live like a queen forever. The law in our state regarding pretermitted heirs of children born or discovered after a will is executed or not specifically mentioned is very clear. Because Robert hadn't explicitly written, I leave nothing to Liam and Chloe, the law assumed he had simply forgotten to update his will. Therefore, the will was essentially rewritten by the state. The assets weren't all Elena's. The estate was divided according to intestacy laws. The spouse got the first $50,000 and half of the remainder. The other half was divided equally among the surviving children, all 3 of them. Elena's share dropped from 100% to roughly 50% of a much smaller pot. But I wasn't done with her, because she had signed that false affidavit, causing this massive legal battle. The independent administrator sued her portion of the estate for the legal fees. By the time the dust settled, and the lawyers were paid, Aelina walked away with about $400,000. It sounds like a lot, until you realize she had racked up $200,000 in credit card debt, anticipating the millions. She had to sell the engagement ring, the one she flaunted in my face for 2 years, just to pay her bankruptcy attorney. I saw her once, months later, coming out of a pawn shop in Midtown. She looked tired. She wasn't wearing the veil or the designer dress. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who gambled on a lie and lost. As for my share, I didn't keep it. I took my portion, combined it with the portions allocated to Liam and Chloe, and set up a revocable education trust for them. Sarah cried when I handed her the paperwork. She had spent 15 years worrying about how she would send them to college. Now they were going to Ivy League schools if they wanted to. I didn't need my father's money. I had my own career, my own reputation, and now I had something I thought I had lost forever: family. I spend weekends in Ohio now. I'm teaching Liam how to drive, and Chloe asks me for help with her math homework. My father tried to erase us to protect his image, but in the end, his money went exactly where it was supposed to go, to the children he tried to hide and the son he tried to break. I walked away with $0 in my pocket, but I felt richer than Robert Thorne ever was. I often sit in my office now, looking at that framed photo of Liam and Chloe from their graduation, the one I slammed onto the conference table that day. It serves as a daily reminder of the most important lesson my father taught me, though he never intended to teach it. You cannot build a future on a foundation of lies. My father, Robert Thorne, spent his entire life believing he was the architect of his own reality. He thought he could compartmentalize people like he compartmentalized his business assets. He thought he could have the secret family in Ohio to satisfy his need for genuine connection, and the trophy wife in New York to satisfy his ego, and the discarded son to satisfy his need for control. He thought that if he just threw enough money at the problems, or withheld enough money from them, he could curate his legacy from the grave. He was wrong. In the end, his legacy wasn't the logistics company he built, nor the millions he amassed. His legacy was the wreckage he left behind. He died thinking he had orchestrated the perfect exit, but all he really did was leave a ticking time bomb in the hands of the people he claimed to love. And Elena, she was the perfect accomplice to his delusion. She saw the dollar signs and the status, but she never looked at the man. She was so focused on being the winner, on being the sole beneficiary, that she didn't realize she was fighting for a kingdom built on quicksand. Her greed blinded her to the obvious red flags. If a man is willing to discard his own son of 30 years without a second thought, what makes you think he isn't hiding something else? She tried to take everything, and because she refused to share even a crumb, she ended up with nothing: legal bills and a reputation as a gold digger who got outsmarted. I think about the irony of it all. If my father had just been honest, if he had introduced us, if he had treated me with respect, if he hadn't let Elena poison his mind, we might have worked it out. I might have helped him protect his assets. We could have been a messy, complicated, but real family. Instead, he chose a lie. And lies have a way of compounding interest, just like debt. Eventually, the bill comes due. I didn't want his money. I proved that by giving it away to the siblings he tried to hide. I wanted the truth. I wanted to balance the ledger. And standing here today, watching Liam go off to college and seeing Sarah finally live without fear of the next bill, I know the audit is finally complete. There is a certain peace in knowing that no matter how many lawyers you hire, no matter how many affidavits you sign, and no matter how deep you bury your secrets, you cannot escape the reality of who you are. My father tried to disinherit me from his life. He tried to disinherit Liam and Chloe from his history, but he forgot the one rule that governs both forensic accounting and life itself. The truth is the only thing you can't disinherit. It always finds a way to claim its share. This is silent karma. We don't scream for attention. We just wait for the truth to speak for itself. If you enjoyed this story of justice and revelation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know what secrets are hiding in the fine print. Stay silent. Stay sharp.